a member of Frack Free Lancashire, which campaigns against fracking.
Yeah.
Very briefly, can you explain for us, or to us, what fracking is?
Fracking's a method of energy extraction to get gas out of the ground. As we've obviously used up all of the very much higher layers to get coal and things out, we now have to dig ever deeper to get those last bits out. And so fracking is where you drill down possibly about 1.5 miles. I'm going to just round everything up. About 1.5 miles, but then you will go horizontally about 1.5 miles. And then with really high volume, you'll send down water infused with some chemical and little tiny bits of silica sand, which act as a propellant. So as you send it down at high pressure, it fractures the shale. And when it fractures the shale, those little bits of sand stay in the fractures, and then the gas bubbles back. About half of everything you sent down there doesn't come back, that liquid, which is one of the things that's quite so awfully terrifying about this, which is there are very few, no, in fact, there are no other processes that we do that extract water from the water table and do not return it. And this does not return it. It's underground. What does come back is now at the shale level, you pick up something called naturally occurring radioactive material.
Radioactive material.
Yeah. So now you've made
cancerous material.
Absolutely. So you haven't necessarily included a chemical that was cancerous at this point, although there are chemicals that are used in the process that are cancerous. But you've also, just no matter what, you've picked up radioactive material. You've now got some radioactivity to the flowback. And when the flowback comes back up, it's got the gas that needs to be extracted, and then you are left with this highly toxic waste, for which there is no plan on where we put that. In the States currently, they when they're finished with the well and there's nothing left to draw out, because you'll frack it, several times, maybe sort of anything up to 30 times if you can keep on getting the last bits out. But once you've finished with that, in the States, they tend to send all the waste back down there again, which is what's led to Ohio having, going from like sort of one earthquake every couple of months or something to something like 700 a month. And it's just mad, the number of earthquakes and that people are just living with this because they have no ability to fight the government.
You had an earthquake in Blackpool, didn't you?
We did. Fracking itself can cause an earthquake. I mean, for us, where they did it in April 2011, the first and only proper fracturing job. The rest of so far, they put in test drills and so on. But the first and only frack that they did was at Priest Hall. And when they did it, they drilled straight into a fault line. And what they send down, they call slick water, because one of the things they add to it makes it slightly slippery. And so it goes into it was going into the fault line. Actually, earthquakes are really good for fracking because it releases more gas and it actually increases the range of your fractures. So they're not necessarily adverse to the old little minor earthquake. And they were quite minor, but the point wasn't how strongly we felt it. For us, the point was, what do you mean we caused a man-made earthquake? Mm-hmm. And it's not setting a good start for this industry. And they didn't admit it for 6 weeks. It took them 6 weeks.
When you say they, are you talking about
Quadrilla,
the company that is doing the fracking?
Yes, because they were asked, is this you? Because obviously the epicenter was around them. And they said no, and they denied it. But then within 6 weeks, they had to stop operations and have a full investigation. So that meant then that they weren't allowed to operate any fracturing in the United Kingdom until December 2012 when that moratorium was overthrown.
Okay, so
but by then and again, there is no statement you'll find anywhere Quadrilla says, I'm sorry, we caused that earthquake. They speak in strange terms, but everybody accepts they caused the earthquake. And then they hired Durham University to produce a report that said it was as bad as a bus going past your house. Well, maybe it was, and maybe it's unconnected, but in the Blackpool area, all our sewers obviously work on a gradient, and we had a great deal of sewer damage, and so there's been a great deal of works going on to repair those sewers. A couple of our bridges had a little bit of damage, people's houses had cracks in them, people definitely felt it. No, it wasn't the hugest trauma, but it certainly made us wake up, and I think we're really grateful that actually we had that early warning. Because if we hadn't seen that at that point, it had been so quietly under the radar that they were going to do this. I think we would have not known, and we'd be knee-deep in fracking now. So
Okay, well, there still is the potential for us to be knee-deep in fracking,
yes.
Because there's basically what happened, and correct me if I'm wrong in any of this, but Quadrilla put forward a case to Lancashire County Council to frack in Lancashire,
yes.
And that was rejected.
Absolutely.
On what grounds?
It was rejected on the grounds, and they'll tell you it's the grounds of traffic and noise. But they don't give you the full sentence. The full sentence was the health effects of continuous traffic and intense noise over a prolonged period of time that would cause, sleep deficiency, and you would be
So very serious mental, well,
really,
potentially
yeah.
serious mental health problems.
Yeah, and that's, we were sad that they didn't look into what the burning off of methane was going to do, or what the toxicity of the chemicals and the flowback water, or all of the other things that we thought were much more important. But in the end, we got them on traffic and noise, and we will take whatever we can. But these are small communities. There are people who have taken their kids out of school based on the thought that if they put that fracking rig there, they're within a half a mile of a school. They should be, it was mentioned in the States, in some places they have a 2-mile buffer zone, because you can't be close to it. But then a lot of places just ignore that, because in the end it's cheaper for them to ignore the fine and just keep on taking the money.
Right, okay. So, but they've now appealed that.
Yes.
They've appealed that the decision for...
And it's their right. This is our process, and we agree to an appeal. That's normal.
And am I right in saying that there's currently a 5-week public inquiry
Yep, we're
underway?
on week 3. This is the end of week 2 now.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
And at the end of that inquiry, it's not going to be the decision, or it's not going to be up to Lancashire County Council to make the decision. It's going to be the decision will be made by the Secretary of State for the Department of Communities and Local Government, who is Mr. Greg Clark.
An MP from Kent.
An MP from Kent, who has championed localism,
Yeah.
but now he's wanting national government to make decisions on local government issues. Is that, do you welcome that move by him?
Absolutely not. And there was a letter leaked, and it came out in the press about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And it was written 1 week after Lancashire County Council said no to Quadrilla's plans. 1 week after that, there was a letter written by Greg Clark with Amber Rudd and Liz Truss,
Who are from the Department of Energy and Climate
the
Change.
key
Amber Rudd is
regulators for this industry.
Right.
And they wrote to George Osborne, or in reply to George Osborne, saying to him that this decision could be taken back into government hands. So in other words, just 1 week after we had a local democratic decision where our councillors stood by the residents and said no, that within a week they were then discussing how they could take that decision of us, knowing that in an appeal we will still win. I've sat through many days of the appeal this last 2 weeks, and it is so obvious which side is telling the truth and which side is full of waffle. It's just clear that they do not have the right answers. Francis Egan, the head of the company, was there.
Which company?
Quadrilla.
Quadrilla. Okay.
The other evening, and he just looks devastated. He looks worn down because they put up 4 people to say we want fracking, and we'll have tens of people to say we don't, just on who we can get on the stands. At any demonstration, we can call thousands
So
to say
people power
no.
very much.
Absolutely.
Very much in
and
effect.
that if you had to say, and it's really hard to find, that there's a good side to this, and it ties in with what else we discussed. It's community building. Do you know, when we're standing together opposing something that threatens our air and our water and our children's futures, really, that's when your priorities kick in. And you stop noticing the differences within a community, and you start noticing the sameness. What do we need to do to pull together to keep us safe? And I think maybe that's where fracking kind of saves communities. I've seen it happen all over the country. We've delivered hundreds and hundreds of public meetings and watched every side of a community come together and stand together, and it's been a very beautiful thing to watch.
Okay, well, let's look at some of the health concerns about fracking, because New York, the state of New York, has actually kicked out any idea of fracking
Absolutely.
because of health concerns. Now, there was a report, or rather a study in 2013 done by the University of Missouri, December 2013, that found that water near fracking sites contains more chemicals which can cause cancer, birth defects and infertility than water in areas not affected by fracking. I don't think the people of Lancashire will be wanting such things in their water supply. Interestingly as well, Breast Cancer UK support a ban on, quote, the use of all compounds that show carcinogenic or endocrine disrupting properties in fracking operations in all EU countries, including the United Kingdom. There was a report also by the UK health charity MedAct, which is comprised of medical experts, academics and practitioners. They examined the health impact of fracking and found it poses significant risks to public health. Also, in the British Medical Journal, there was an open letter signed by 18 leading health experts in the United Kingdom, and they said, quote, the arguments against fracking on public health and ecological grounds are overwhelming. there are clear grounds for adopting the precautionary principle and prohibiting fracking.
Absolutely.
So do you think the government is going to listen to you, the protesters, who have the medical experts on your side, that fracking can cause cancer, it's not a good idea? And we can talk about the economic benefits, but I don't think we can, because there aren't any.
No, not
we'll
for
come back
us
to that.
as
We'll come
either.
back to that. But on medical grounds alone,
Yeah.
what-
On medical grounds alone, that should be enough. That's talking about our
it-
children's health.
if the government goes ahead with this, effectively, it's indirectly could be responsible. The Department for Communities and Local Government could be responsible for increasing cancer in the United Kingdom.
Absolutely, they can be responsible for early term pregnancies, early births, and that leads to
deformities.
Absolutely, and to health implications throughout that child's life. Then, and our government's willing to do this, and yet it can look and it can say, right, New York banned this because they had these facts. France banned it because they had these facts. Scotland is hesitant because they have these facts, and in Australia we have evidence all over the world that this is a bad idea. And what is it their governments and their officials can see that David Cameron is ignoring?
Okay.
So all other arguments could be blown out of the water just based on the health one alone. We should win.
Two other issues then. There are the economic reasons for or against fracking,
Yep.
and then of course there are the issues to do with climate change.
Absolutely.
So economically, tell me briefly, is fracking good or not?
Lord Brown, who was the head of Quadrilla, said very clearly in the press just a couple of years ago, this will not bring down our energy prices. The way we work is the UK is part of a European market. We do not make things for UK use only. You cannot extract that gas and go, that's just ours.
We're in the EU.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we import 90% of our gas comes in from Norway and Qatar, but we also export our gas. So when they say, what will you do to keep the lights on? Well, how about we stop exporting the stuff for a start, and then we'd have some. You can't be an exporter and say, but we don't have enough. Because clearly if you're exporting, we have excess. And also, everything we produce must go to the European market, and then like any other commercial company, it's bought and sold based on prices, not based on the UK consumer's need.
So it's the markets which decide.
Absolutely, the markets.
It's the traders, it's the bankers who will
And
benefit.
you look at one
Is
company,
that true?
Absolutely. And you look at a company like Quadrilla, which is part owned by AJ Lucas and operated by Riverstone Financial Services. These are not UK companies. They don't care whether our bills are lower. This is not their primary interest. Their primary interest is their own shareholders and their gains. And I don't know a single company that isn't obliged to do that. They are obliged to shareholders, not to us. So we don't win. And also you have to look at how many of these companies bank offshore. It doesn't even benefit the coffers for our country. So the money's banked offshore. So what gain? What gain is there?
What gain? Okay, well, we'd love to hear your views on that, whether you are for or against fracking. We're particularly interested in those who want to defend fracking, who can stand up for fracking and make arguments for its case. There don't seem to be very many arguments, but we'd love to hear from you. If you are watching from Quadrilla, and I believe you are tonight, because I spoke to you on the phone earlier, a member of your press office, and I'm going to read out your statements in just a minute. But if you are watching from Quadrilla, and you're probably watching people like Tina very, very closely, if you are watching, then do call us, 01254 277 370. We'd love to hear what your thoughts are. We'd love to hear your defence of fracking. So call us and contribute, because we'd love to have an open discussion on this. We are also, I must say, in talks, or I have called Quadrilla early this afternoon, and asked for them to send a member of Quadrilla to come in and defend fracking, and specifically Quadrilla's fracking ambitions in Lancashire. I've also been speaking to the Department for Communities and Local Government, and we are trying to get, on a future episode, a minister from that government to come on and explain exactly what's going on with in regards to fracking. And I asked them a question earlier today. I sent an email to the Department for Communities and Local Government. The email read, Greg Clark, who of course is the Secretary of State for that department. I said, Greg Clark has championed localism. Why is he now saying he will make the final decision in the case of Quadrilla's appeal in Lancashire regarding fracking? Why will he not let the local council make the final decision? Doesn't this contradict his support of localism? The reply from the Department of Communities and Local Government was, and I quote, local communities remain fully involved in planning decisions over any shale application, whether decided by councils or government, and strict planning rules ensuring shale development happens only at appropriate sites remain unchanged. In line with national planning policy and legislation, ministers have the power to make decisions on appeals of more than local significance. Do you buy that?
I think I'd really love to know what their definition of local communities involved means. When we're sitting on the outside, having got what we thought was a local democratic decision, and in part of a democracy, we expected to be heard. And now we're being told that regardless of what happens, and if you could see the people that I work with, some of us have been at this for 4.5 years, put our lives on hold. I miss time with my grandchild. I've had to reduce my working hours. People have made themselves quite ill with the fact that we have to read 7,000-page documents and disseminate that information. And we put all this work and effort in, and the people who are giving evidence during the appeal, the residents groups, which are all part of Frack Free Lancashire, are drained and exhausted, and they put their hearts and souls into this. For what? At the very end, it will not matter if the government steals this decision for us. And the thing is that the whole of the UK is watching this, because what happens in Lancashire sets the precedents everywhere. And at the moment, there's drilling in Surrey, Lincolnshire, and Yorkshire as well.
It's happening, isn't it?
Yeah, well, the drills have gone in for exploratory drilling.
Okay.
And they have just when they did the infrastructure bill in January 2015, they set about redefining what is fracking. So now, if you're a little bit less deep and a little bit less water, they're not going to call it fracking.
What will they call it?
Exploratory drilling, flow testing.
Right.
There's a million names, so that when we oppose it, they go, no, you're an idiot. It's not fracking, which is what we constantly get. But we know it. In the end, they are sending down at high pressure to fracture the shell.
And
no matter how you look at it.
All the health risks are still there.
Once you drilled the hole, the health risks are there.
Now, something else that someone else we have to talk about, who you mentioned briefly, is Lord Brand. I emailed again the Department for Communities and Local Government, and this is exactly what I asked them. I said, I asked him if Mr. Clark's involvement in Quadrilla's or Mr. Clark's involvement or decision to get involved in the Quadrilla appeal was anything to do with the influence of Lord Brand, who was made an unelected member of the Cabinet Office in 2010 by Francis Maud and was former chair of Quadrilla. And I said, whilst I am not making any accusations, do you see why some people may feel that Mr. Clark is acting on behalf of Quadrilla, a private corporation, against the electorate? Their reply was, it is untrue that Greg Clark's move to make the final decision on Quadrilla's appeal has anything to do with Lord Brand's influence in the Cabinet Office. Well, I think we'll have to put in some freedom of information requests to see if that is true. But it is worrying that unelected officials with clear personal and corporate vested interests can be unelected Cabinet officials. Who are they accountable to?
And also Lord Brand, although he's no longer head of Quadrilla, he's now, despite the fact that when he was, he said, oh, well, in the end, Russia's so dangerous and unreliable, and we get some of our gas from there, so you wouldn't want to have to rely on that. We must have a homegrown supply. And yet now he's working for a Russian gas firm, so clearly it wasn't that bad. However, with Francis Maud, of course, is the MP for Bolcombe, which is where drilling took place by Quadrilla in 2013. And they did exploratory drilling there as well. And the people rose up, and now they're aiming to be the first 100% renewable town in the country, because it split the community first, and then the community came together.
So they're saying renewable energy instead of fracking.
Absolutely.
Well, let's have a look at that very briefly, because we have two other stories we need to look at. But I sent an email to Quadrilla's press office. I asked them, I said, just how beneficial is fracking? Because the government has just signed up to reducing its methane emissions under COP21. And of course, we know for a fact that methane emissions are increased by fracking, but that's not quite what they had to say. They, well, this is what they had to say. Regarding your questions on methane, REFINE, the EU-sponsored organisation tasked with researching fracking in Europe, based out of Durham and Newcastle universities, recently published a study which found that fugitive emissions of methane from decommissioned wells were not significant. The study found that emissions from wells no longer in use were, on average, less than those produced by normal agricultural use of the same land. Now, I wasn't asking them about decommissioned wells, so I don't know why they gave me that response, and to be honest, I can't quite make sense of it, which suggests that they're trying to avoid the question. So that's why, again, I will put a plea out to Quadrilla. I will be contacting you next week, and I would like to get a member of Quadrilla onto the show so we can have a discussion face-to-face, not via email, face-to-face, so you can come and defend your reasons for wanting to frack Lancashire and perhaps other parts of the United Kingdom. I then also, I'll carry on, because we were speaking about renewable energy. Regarding your question on why the UK should not invest in renewables rather than gas, our response is There is a key role for gas, along with renewables and nuclear power, to play in the 21st century low-carbon energy future. That was recently stated by the UK's Chief Scientific Officer, John Lockhead. In the UK, 84% of homes are heated by gas, 61% of homes use gas for cooking, and around a third of electricity is generated from gas. Again, not quite answering the question.
Not at all. They don't usually answer the question. It would also be worth asking when you do any freedom of information request, is ask...
If they don't kill me beforehand.
Is ask, where does the Durham University get its funding? Who funds Durham University? Who funds Refine? This is a university that most of our universities have been forced to take in funding from the energy companies. And also, who do they invest in? You'll find a huge divestment movement in the country trying to get the universities to take their investments out of the fossil fuel companies. And, it was only in December at COP21 when our Prime Minister stood there and agreed that in order to avoid 2 degree, any climate change, any worse climate change effects, we had to stay below 1.5 degrees, which means leaving everything we have in the ground.
Okay.
And this doesn't solve it.
Let's move on, but I'll tell you what I think of what they told me.
Absolutely.
Not much,
Absolutely.
to be honest. But
No.
we still would like to give Quadrilla a chance to come in and explain themselves properly using language that we can actually understand and not avoiding questions and answering the questions that we specifically ask them. So we invite Quadrilla onto the show. We also invite a representative of the Department of Communities and local government onto the show. Now, let's move on to Gideon Osborne, our Chancellor of the Exchequer, or George Osborne. Now, this is the headline: Chancellor's borrowing target in doubt despite big January surplus. So he's in surplus, which is to his credit, and it's the biggest surplus that we've had since the financial crisis of 2008. But he may still go over budget, and the Office of Budget Responsibility says that he may well do so before the financial year ends in April. But before we look at Mr. Osborne's track record on government borrowing, we're running short of time, but tell me briefly, you've met Mr. Osborne. I don't know if he deserves to be called Mr. Osborne. You've met George,
yes,
or George was born yesterday, it seems,
yes,
because he doesn't seem to have much economic knowledge. But you've met the man, and this is because you stood as a parliamentary candidate for the Green Party in Tatton at the 2015 general election.
Yeah. Although not naturally political, it was a really great opportunity that was presented. And I really wanted to experience the process of democracy and government, and how, because by this stage, so I've been